My belief in the responsibility to fight voter suppression started when I was growing up. My parents were both civil rights activists as teenagers in Mississippi. My dad was arrested signing people up to vote when he was 16. And my mom used to take us with her when she would pick us up from school on election days. She would take us with her to vote. There's 6 of us, so we look like make-way for ducklings, like spilling out. But we were raised to understand that voting is directly tied to the services and policies that you want to see. Voter suppression acts as a means of denying those policies reality, and it is baked into the DNA of America. It has been perfected in recent years, in the last 2 decades, in a way that lets us forget that it's real because it has so many pieces, and that's the architecture. Voter suppression isn't simply saying you can't vote. Voter suppression is both a physical activity, but it's also a psychic effect. Telling people their votes won't count, telling people that the system is rigged, has the act of actually stopping people from trying to use it. And then just to make sure it works, there is the actual apparatus. And I think about it in 3 ways. There is the registration access, making it difficult to get on the rolls. You cannot vote in the United States unless you are signed up to do so. It's like having a driver's license. And so what we have found is that depending on the state you're in, there have been impediments put in place to registration. If you're in Texas, they tell third-party organizations it's difficult to register you. That matters because the hardest to register communities are communities of color, newly registered citizens, and low-income communities. They require third parties to come to them because they often don't know how to do it on their own. In Georgia, we had sort of the trifecta of it was hard to get on the rolls because the Secretary of State kept raiding the offices or attacking those who were doing third-party registrations. He then used what's called exact match, which said that if your name has any error when someone is typing it into the system, that would be a predicate for denying you the right to vote. And in Georgia in 2018, 53,000 people were caught up in this bureaucratic nightmare. So let's say your last name is Del Rios, and you spell it D-E-L space R-I-O-S. Is that your last name? Under Georgia law, or not Georgia law, but Georgia's practice on your driver's license, they take out the space. So that becomes the database that is used. But your parents named you Del Rios with a space. So you put in your name the way it is on your birth certificate and on your Social Security card. But in Georgia, because the Driver's License Administration does not recognize the space, you are denied the right to vote because it does not exactly match the database. 53,000 people were denied, 90% of whom were people of color. Mm-hmm. The third part is that if you were a naturalized citizen, there were some parts of the Secretary of State's office that were demanding that you use your alien registration number as part of your application. It is against the federal law to use your alien registration number because you're no longer an alien. You are now a citizen. And so in order to achieve the right to vote, you were being denied access. So registration is the first. And then there's the use it or lose it laws. That's the Ohio case that was just settled by the Supreme Court. In the United States, we do not have mandatory voting. Use it or lose it laws were originally designed to say that if you're dead or you've moved, you probably shouldn't vote where you used to live. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. But it's now been used to say if you don't vote in a certain number of successive elections, that can be used as a reason to take you off the rolls. But the problem is it's not precise. And so you have hundreds of thousands of people who are removed from the rolls who voted. And they don't find out they've been removed until they go to vote. But because most of these states don't do same-day registration, you're just denied the right to vote. So that's the first piece, registration. Second is ballot access. Ballot access is you, in states that have absentee balloting, you apply for an absentee ballot. It may or may not arrive. Jermaine Dupree, who's so deaf, he had to fly his daughter from Miami because her absentee ballot, which she applied for, never showed up. Mm. Jermaine Dupree ain't my daddy. So if you do not have someone who is wealthy enough to actually fly you home to vote, you've been suppressed because your right to vote has been denied because you didn't get your absentee ballot. If you live in Mississippi or Alabama, you may have to pay a notary public to verify that you have submitted your ballot properly, which means you have to pay someone for the right to vote. So ballot access becomes an issue. It also is an issue with early voting, moving polling places. Georgia has about 3,000 polling places, precincts. They shut down 214 of them. If you live in a county where there are only 2, and now there's 1 and you don't have a car, and the one that you used to go to is down the street, and the one you have to go to now is 5 to 10 miles away, you're not going to be able to vote because you don't have a car. And so ballot access becomes an issue. And then the third is counting the ballots. And I just refer to that as the Florida problem.
I'm sure the people in Florida are very happy to hear that.
I mean, they've been the most constant example of this. But that is, once you submitted your ballot, did it actually count? Did they count did they actually process it? In Georgia, we had to go to court 4 times in the 10-day period between Election Day and the day of my non-concession speech. And we got 3.5 verdicts. Yes, we got 3.5 verdicts in our favor. And part of that was that certain counties were throwing out absentee ballots because the signature didn't match. My signature doesn't match from Kroger to Wells Fargo. And they were matching it against your driver's license that you signed 10 years ago before you actually figured out how to do the curly S that you liked. So that was being used to deny people the right to vote. They were throwing out absentee ballots because people put the date in the wrong place, because there are 2 lines that said date. One was birth date, and the other was the date that you were submitting it. But it didn't say birth date and date of submission. It just said date. And certain counties were denying the right to vote. And so across the country, that ballot counting becomes the issue. So registration, ballot access, and ballot counting, that's how suppression works.